A handshake between Ankara and Beijing just sent shockwaves through NATO headquarters. Turkey, a cornerstone of Western defense, has made a choice that could rewrite the global order. And well, Washington is scrambling to figure out what just happened. When Turkey and China announced their landmark agreement, the news didn't make front-page headlines everywhere, but in intelligence briefings, strategy rooms, and foreign ministries around the planet, it triggered alarm bells that are still ringing. This wasn't just another trade memorandum or a symbolic photo opportunity. It was a calculated geopolitical maneuver with the power to redraw alliances, shift economic gravity, and challenge the foundations of the post-World War II international system. For decades, Turkey occupied a unique position. Straddling two continents, it served as a bridge between Europe and Asia, Islam and secularism, NATO and the non-aligned world. But under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, that role has evolved. Turkey no longer sees itself as a junior partner waiting for approval from Brussels or Washington. It wants leverage, it wants autonomy, and increasingly, it's willing to look east to get it. China, meanwhile, has been expanding its influence far beyond its borders for years. Through infrastructure investments, technology exports, and diplomatic outreach, Beijing has built relationships that challenge American dominance without firing a single shot. Turkey represents a prize that few other countries can match: a NATO member, a regional military power, and a gateway to three critical regions: Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. So when Turkey's leadership sat down with Chinese officials and agreed to a comprehensive strategic partnership, the implications were immediate. NATO allies began asking uncomfortable questions. Could Turkey still be trusted with sensitive intelligence? Would Chinese engineers soon have access to NATO infrastructure? And most troubling of all, was this the beginning of Turkey's slow exit from the Western alliance? Let's break down what actually happened, why it matters, and what it could mean for the future of global power. The deal that changed everything. The agreement didn't materialize overnight. Behind closed doors, Turkish and Chinese diplomats had been negotiating for months. What emerged was a partnership far more ambitious than a typical infrastructure deal. Over the next 5 years, China has committed to pouring more than $15 billion into Turkey's economy. That's not just money. It's influence, access, and long-term strategic positioning. The funds are earmarked for a sweeping range of projects. Ports will be expanded, railway networks will be modernized, energy infrastructure will be upgraded, technology partnerships will deepen, and at the heart of it all is Turkey's integration into China's Belt and Road Initiative, the trillion-dollar global infrastructure project designed to reshape trade routes and political relationships across continents. One centerpiece is the port of Mersin, located on Turkey's southern Mediterranean coast. With Chinese investment, the port is set to undergo a transformation. Capacity will multiply. New terminals will rise. By the end of the decade, Mersin could become one of the busiest maritime hubs connecting Asia to Europe, a critical node in China's vast commercial network. Then there are the railways. High-speed rail lines are being planned to link Istanbul, Ankara, and cities further east. These aren't just passenger routes. They're designed to move cargo quickly and efficiently, reducing delivery times and logistics costs. For China, it means faster access to European markets. For Turkey, it means economic revitalization and thousands of new jobs. But infrastructure is only part of the story. China is also making inroads into Turkey's digital future. Chinese telecommunications giants are positioning themselves to build 5G networks across the country. Smart city technologies, advanced logistics platforms, and surveillance systems are all on the table. In the energy sector, joint ventures are planned for natural gas terminals, pipeline expansions, and electrical grid modernization. Together, these projects could transform Turkey into a critical energy corridor, channeling resources from the Middle East and Central Asia into Europe. For Turkey, the timing couldn't be more urgent. The country has been struggling with economic instability for years. Inflation has soared. the Turkish lira has lost significant value. Public frustration is rising. Western credit lines and investment have dried up, partly due to political tensions and partly due to concerns about governance and democracy. China, by contrast, doesn't ask questions about human rights or electoral fairness. It offers cash, infrastructure, and economic relief. No strings attached, at least not publicly. For Erdogan, this partnership offers a political lifeline. New construction projects mean jobs. Jobs mean voter support. And economic growth, even if fueled by Chinese investment, can stabilize his domestic position. But the price of that stability could be measured in geopolitical currency. NATO's worst nightmare. Turkey joined NATO in 1952 during the height of the Cold War. Its strategic location made it indispensable. Controlling the straits connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, hosting American air bases, and bordering the Soviet Union, Turkey was a frontline state in the Western Alliance. 70 years later, that role remains critical. American nuclear weapons are still stationed on Turkish soil. Radar installations monitor threats from the east. And Turkey commands the second-largest military force in NATO. But now, that same NATO member is deepening ties with a country that the United States considers its primary long-term rival. In Washington, officials are trying to understand the extent of the damage. Can Turkey still be trusted with classified intelligence? Will Chinese engineers working on Turkish infrastructure gain insights into NATO systems? And if tensions escalate between the West and China, which side will Turkey choose? These aren't hypothetical concerns. Turkey has already tested NATO's patience. In 2017, Ankara signed a deal to purchase Russia's S-400 air defense system, a move that directly contradicted NATO interoperability standards. The United States responded by removing Turkey from the F-35 fighter jet program, a humiliating blow that cost Turkey billions and damaged military readiness. That decision opened a gap, and China appears ready to fill it. European capitals are equally anxious. Turkey plays a crucial role in managing migration flows into Europe. Millions of refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones have been prevented from crossing into Greece and beyond because of agreements with Turkey. But if Ankara becomes less dependent on European financial support, thanks to Chinese investment, it gains the freedom to act unilaterally. European leaders worry that Turkey could use migration as leverage, opening or closing the gates depending on political circumstances. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom are all recalibrating their approach. Some officials argue for engagement, trying to pull Turkey back toward the West through diplomacy and incentives. Others advocate for a tougher stance, imposing costs for strategic betrayal. But there's no consensus, and that division weakens Europe's ability to respond effectively. Russia's dilemma, well, it's actually pretty interesting. Moscow's reaction to the Turkey-China partnership is, quite complex. On the surface, anything that weakens NATO is seen as a benefit for Russia. A divided alliance is always easier to manage than a unified one. And honestly, Turkey's drift away from the West undermines American influence in a region where Russia has some pretty deep interests. But there's also, a sense of unease. Russia and Turkey have their own complicated relationship, marked by cooperation in some areas and rivalry in others. They've worked together in Syria, coordinated on energy projects, and maintained economic ties despite plenty of political differences. Yet, they've also clashed over influence in the Caucasus, Libya, and Central Asia. Now, China's growing presence in Turkey introduces a whole new variable. If Beijing gains a foothold in areas where Moscow traditionally held sway, it could create competition rather than partnership. Russia is definitely wary of becoming a junior partner in any China-led order, and Turkey's pivot east just complicates that dynamic. Still, for now, Russia is playing it carefully. Publicly, Moscow expresses support for multipolarity and non-Western cooperation. Privately, though, officials are likely assessing how to maintain influence while avoiding direct confrontation with Beijing. The Middle East watches closely, and, honestly, reactions vary quite a bit. In Tehran, Iranian officials see Turkey's closer ties with China as a positive development. Both countries have faced American sanctions and pressure, so a stronger partnership between Ankara and Beijing could provide diplomatic cover and economic alternatives, reducing Western leverage across the region. In the Gulf states, the response is more cautious. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have also been expanding their own relationships with China, hedging against uncertainty in the American security umbrella. But they're watching Turkey carefully, wary of any shift that could empower Ankara at their expense. Israel faces a different set of concerns altogether. Turkey and Israel have had a turbulent relationship for years, swinging between cooperation and hostility. A stronger, more autonomous Turkey aligned with China could complicate Israeli security calculations, especially in the eastern Mediterranean where energy resources and maritime boundaries are contested. Egypt, too, is paying attention. As a rival to Turkey for regional influence, Cairo is likely reviewing its own partnerships and considering how to counterbalance Ankara's growing ties with Beijing. Beyond economics, there's the military dimension, and honestly, that's where things get even more serious. While the public focus has been on infrastructure and trade, the strategic implications here run much deeper. Turkey and China haven't announced any formal military alliance, but the groundwork is definitely being laid. Defense cooperation, technology transfers, and joint development projects are all under discussion. Turkey's defense industry has been growing rapidly. The country produces its own drones, armored vehicles, and naval vessels, but it still relies on Western technology for many advanced systems. With access to American and European equipment now restricted, Turkey is looking for alternatives, and China has plenty to offer. Chinese defense companies can provide drones, missiles, radar systems, and electronic warfare technology. Some of these systems, honestly, rival Western equivalents in capability. For Turkey, acquiring them means greater independence. For NATO, it means compatibility issues, security risks, and, the potential for technology leaks. There's also the cyber dimension to consider. China is a global leader in artificial intelligence, surveillance technology, and cyber operations. Turkish adoption of Chinese digital infrastructure could provide Beijing with access to sensitive data, communications networks, and critical systems. NATO officials are deeply concerned about the security implications, particularly if Turkish networks become integrated with Chinese platforms. Space cooperation is another frontier. Turkey has ambitions to develop its own satellite capabilities, and China has offered assistance. Joint space projects could reduce Western dominance in reconnaissance and communications, giving China a strategic foothold near Europe. And then there's the possibility, still distant but no longer unthinkable, of Chinese military assets operating from Turkish territory. If Chinese warships begin making regular port calls, or if joint military exercises become routine, the strategic balance in the Mediterranean and Black Sea could shift dramatically. The cost of silence. Turkey was once one of the most vocal critics of China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims. Turkish politicians and media outlets condemned Beijing's policies in Xinjiang, drawing on cultural and religious solidarity. But as economic ties have deepened, that criticism has faded. Today, Turkish officials rarely mention the issue, and state media has gone quiet. This silence has been noticed, both inside Turkey and abroad. Human rights organizations have accused Ankara of abandoning principles for profit. Domestic critics argue that Erdogan is sacrificing Turkey's moral standing for short-term economic gain. But from the government's perspective, the calculation is pragmatic. Turkey needs investment. China has money. And, well, in a world where principles often take a backseat to interests, Ankara is making the choice that many other countries have made before. What comes next? The future is, uncertain, and several scenarios are possible. In the most optimistic outcome, Turkey manages to balance its relationships, maintaining ties with both NATO and China, while acting as a bridge between East and West. This would require, honestly, skillful diplomacy, domestic stability, and restraint from all sides. A more troubling scenario involves gradual drift. As Chinese investment deepens and economic dependence grows, Turkey's political alignment shifts. Trust with NATO erodes. Intelligence sharing decreases. Military cooperation becomes strained. Eventually, Turkey becomes a semi-detached ally, still formally in NATO but functionally independent or even obstructive. In the worst case, the relationship accelerates into something more formal. A defense pact, military bases, intelligence sharing, technology integration. At that point, Turkey would effectively function as a Chinese partner operating inside a Western alliance, a security nightmare that could fracture NATO entirely. But there are also factors that could slow or reverse this trend. Domestic politics in Turkey are volatile. Public opinion could shift. Economic problems could worsen despite Chinese investment. Cultural differences between Turkey and China are significant, and long-term partnerships require more than just financial transactions. China, too, might reconsider. Investing heavily in a NATO country carries risks. If Turkey proves unreliable, or if the partnership triggers a serious confrontation with the West, Beijing might decide the costs outweigh the benefits. A world in flux. What's clear is that this partnership reflects a broader transformation. The international system that emerged after 1945 was built on American leadership, Western alliances, and a shared commitment to certain rules and norms. That system is fracturing, power is dispersing, middle-sized countries are asserting independence, and influence is increasingly based on transactions rather than ideology. Turkey's pivot toward China is both a symptom and a driver of this change. It signals that loyalty is conditional, that geography and economics matter more than history, and that the old assumptions about alliances no longer hold. For the United States and Europe, this is a moment of reckoning. Can the West adapt to a world where partners have options? Can it offer compelling alternatives to Chinese investment and influence? Or will more countries follow Turkey's path, seeking autonomy and advantage in a multipolar order? Closing thought. The rules governing global power aren't written in stone. They're negotiated, contested, and rewritten by the choices that nations make. Turkey's decision to embrace China isn't just about ports and railways. It's about sovereignty, strategy, and survival in a world where the old certainties are dissolving. The map of global influence is being redrawn, quietly but unmistakably. And the question isn't whether change is coming. It's whether the world is ready for what comes next. Outro. So, what do you think? Is this the beginning of a new global order, or just another chapter in Turkey's long history of playing both sides? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this analysis valuable, hit that like button and subscribe. Because understanding the shifts happening right now is the only way to make sense of the world we're heading into. See you in the next one.